Introduction. It's not our fault. It's not our fault that we failed to earn straight A's, make perfect college board scores, and get into our first choice of college, or that we were distracted by life at age 21 and missed our first on-ramp to an enchanted career that matched perfectly our talents and passions. It's not our fault that we failed to earn millions of dollars by 22 and billions by 30. Thus getting ourselves on the cover of Forbes, or to end malaria, solve tensions in the Middle East, advise a president, or win our third Academy Award by 35. It's not our fault, and we're not a failure in any sense just because our star didn't glow white-hot from the start. And yet early 21st century society has conspired to make us feel shame for exactly that. For not exploding out of the starting blocks like an Olympic sprinter. For not blooming early. By using the word conspired here, I'm not suggesting a conspiracy of shady characters who've decided in a secret room to rig the economy and its financial and social rewards for early bloomers. The conspiracy I speak of is real, but it is not evil. It consists of us. What I suggest is that parents, schools, employers, the media, and consumers of media are now crazily over-celebrating early achievement as the best kind of achievement or even the only kind. We do so at the cost of shaming the late bloomer and thus shortchanging people and society. It wasn't always so. Joanne, 53, is a late bloomer. Her teenage years were unstable and unhappy. Her mother suffered from multiple sclerosis. Her father earned enough money to support the household, but he was too emotionally frozen to deal with his wife's illness. Joanne and her father barely spoke to each other. In school, Joanne blended into the background. She earned above-average grades but hardly good enough to earn high honors and distinction. A teacher recalls Joanne as bright but unexceptional. An introvert, Joanne passed through high school with few remembering her. She was rejected by the elite college of her dreams. At her fallback college, she kept up her practice of acceptable mediocrity. She was good enough to get by but little more. According to one professor, she showed passion not for academic work but for alternative rock music, to which she dreamily listened for hours a day. Typical of many reasonably bright, unfocused college grads, Joanne entertained thoughts of grad school, perhaps in teaching English. But her first swing at full-time employment was more humbling. A low-level administrative job. For a while, she was a secretary at the local Chamber of Commerce office. Bored, Joanne impulsively married a man from a different country she'd met on a lark. They had a baby girl, but theirs was a marriage of opposites. She was dreamy and passive. He was volatile with an implied streak of violence. The marriage didn't survive 2 years despite the child. They divorced amid hints of domestic abuse. At nearly 30, Joanne saw herself at a dead end, with no job and a dependent child. Perhaps not surprisingly, she began to spiral down. She was diagnosed with clinical depression and occasionally thought about suicide. Her depression prevented her from working much and earning money. She hit an economic bottom. I was as poor as possible without being homeless, she says. Making matters worse, her ex-husband began stalking her and her daughter, forcing her to seek a restraining order. But Joanne had something going for her, a unique talent that no one else knew she possessed. Her formal education hadn't unearthed it. No teacher had seen it. Her classmates had no idea. But it was there all along, her very own awesome, waiting to be discovered. In the months after Joanne hit economic bottom and went on welfare to feed her daughter, she let her imagination drift to her childhood fantasies. It was an act of escapism that society said was irresponsible. But oddly enough, it took her closer to her gift. Only when Joanne let go and let her imagination run loose did her talent begin to surface in spectacular fashion. Ken, 68, is another late bloomer. The youngest of 3, his family nickname, Poco, is Spanish for little. Ken's oldest brother, a star athlete, teacher's pet, popular, handsome, articulate, won a Rockefeller scholarship and got into Stanford. Ken, however, was no early bloomer, and his school years just slipped by. He began to believe that Poco meant of little significance. After graduating from high school in California, Ken went to the local junior college and promptly flunked out. I had no particular direction, he said, shrugging. Then he applied himself, retook the courses he'd failed, graduated, and transferred to Humboldt State, where he majored in forestry. But actual jobs in forestry, he discovered, were more about pushing paper than adventurous hikes in the woods. He became disillusioned. Ken then went into business with his father, a financial advisor of national renown. But the two didn't get along. My father, he says, suffered from a condition that today would be recognized as Asperger's syndrome, a form of near autism. He was physically twitchy, he would pace the floor, he couldn't keep his hands from tapping. He had no ability to fathom what others were feeling. He could say the cruelest things, yet he wasn't cruel. After 9 months, Ken left his father's business and hung out his own shingle as a financial advisor. But with few clients, most of whom he would lose after a few years, he spent long hours with nothing to do. To bring in money, he took construction jobs. He even played slide guitar in a bar. But mostly he read books about management and business, and maybe 30 trade magazines a month for years. During this decade, I developed a theory about valuing companies that was a bit unconventional. With an Asperger's syndrome father, Ken had no role model for leadership. His first part-time secretary left after 9 months, claiming Ken was a lousy and imperious boss. I probably was that, he admits today. Throughout his 20s, Ken's financial advisory service struggled, but his theories landed him a few minor deals in venture capital. One led him to serve as a temp CEO. He felt his ambition stirring and worked it hard. There were about 30 employees. I'd never managed anyone. Now I had to, and I did okay, much better than expected. Do you know what I learned? I learned the most important part of leadership is showing up. Could have fooled me. That wasn't in the books I'd read. I sure didn't learn it from my father. Turns out eagerness is infectious. I moved the CEO's office to an open-glass conference room where everyone could see it and me. I made it a point to be the first there every day and the last to leave. I took employees to lunch every day and to dinner every night, at cheap diners, but I gave them my time and interest. I wandered around endlessly talking to them, focusing on every single one and what they thought. The effect amazed me, and them, that I cared made them care. Suddenly I felt what it was like to lead. Ken was 30 years old before he began to touch his potential. Have you identified these two late bloomers? Here's a hint. Joanne and Ken are both self-made billionaires who regularly appear on the Forbes list of the wealthiest people in the world. Joanne Kathleen J. K. Rowling is author of the Harry Potter series. Ken Fisher is the founder of Fisher Investments, which manages $100 billion in stocks and bonds for more than 50,000 clients worldwide. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Asked Simon and Garfunkel in Mrs. Robinson, a pop song from the 1960s. Songwriter Paul Simon knew the turbulent 1960s had overthrown the quiet, unassuming hero of the 1940s and 1950s as a cultural icon. The new hero was young, hip, and brash. In our own disruptive and turbulent economic age, we might ask, where have you gone, late bloomer? I ask this question because successful late bloomers like Rowling and Fisher, with their bashful young years, slow starts, and unhurried journeys, have appealing stories. But their stories are also curiously out of step with today's hip social media culture. Rowling is in her 50s, and Fisher in his 60s, which might lead us to ask, where are today's inspiring late bloomers? Are rich societies such as the United States, Britain, Western Europe, and rising Asia not creating as many late bloomer success stories as they once did? Or is there another reason? Is the late bloomer's slower walk of discovery out of step with today's hyper-competitive, data analytical, real-time pressures? The belief that late bloomers do not get their due recognition, and that both people and society suffer for it, led me to investigate the subject and write this book. I believe the story of those who bloom later in life is more necessary and urgent than ever. At the opposite end of the success spectrum is the early bloomer, the fast starter. 5'1" Riley Weston was spectacular. At age 19, she landed a $300,000 contract with Touchstone, a division of Walt Disney, to write scripts for the television show Felicity, the coming-of-age story of a UCLA freshman. Weston's fast start in Major League Television landed her on Entertainment Weekly's list of Hollywood's most creative people. There was only one problem. Riley Weston was not 19. She was 32, and her real identity, until this profitable ruse, was Kimberly Kramer from Poughkeepsie, New York. People wouldn't accept me if they knew I was 32, she said in her defense. She was probably right. Never before, it seems, has precocity been such an advantage as it is now. In 2014, 17-year-old Malala Yousafzai became the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Prize, which goes along nicely with her Sakharov Prize and her Simone de Beauvoir Prize. In technology, WizKid Palmer Luckey, the 20-year-old founder of Oculus VR, became a face of virtual reality, while 14-year-old Robert Ney cleared over $2 million in just 2 weeks with his mobile game Bubble Ball. At 26, Evan Spiegel was worth $5.4 billion when Snapchat issued public stock in 2017. But Spiegel has miles to go to catch up with Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, now an elder statesman at 34, who with $60 billion is one of the 5 richest people in the world. Even in the stodgy world of chess, Norwegian Magnus Carlsen was a 3-time world champion by 25. This after earning the title of Grandmaster at 13. At 21, he'd become the youngest person ever to be ranked number 1. And at 23, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Today's celebration of early bloomers is a staple of magazine lists. Every year Forbes celebrates young superachievers in a 30 under 30 issue, featuring today's disruptors and tomorrow's brightest stars. Nor is Forbes the only publication to celebrate the precocious among us. The New Yorker's 20 under 40, Fortune's 40 under 40, Inc.'s 35 under 35, and times 30 under 30 issues likewise tip to those who succeed spectacularly at an early age. Please don't misunderstand me. There is nothing wrong with applauding or encouraging early success. Achievements of all types deserve recognition and admiration. But today's powerful zeitgeist goes far beyond simple recognition, excessively promoting the primacy of early measurable achievement, grades, test scores. Glamour, job, money, celebrity conceals a dark flip side. If we or our kids don't knock our SATs out of the park, gain admittance to a top 10 university, reinvent an industry, or land our first job at a cool company that's changing the world, we've somehow failed and are destined to be also rans for the rest of our lives. This message, I believe, creates a trickle-down societal madness for early achievement. This has led to very costly mistakes on the part of educators and parents in how we evaluate children, inflict pressure on them, and place senseless emotional psychological burdens on families. Consider how, in high-pressure cities, some elite preschools play on the fears of affluent parents of 3- and 4-year-olds. The Atlanta International School in Atlanta offers a full immersion second language program for 3-year-olds. Just pony up $20,000 for a year's tuition. But that's a bargain compared to the fees at Columbia Grammar School in New York, which will set you back $37,000 a year. Your 3- and 4-year-olds will get a rigorous academic curriculum dished out in 3 libraries, 6 music rooms, and 7 art studios. Writes Parenting Magazine, Columbia Grammar School's program is all about preparing kids for their futures. Attending prestigious colleges. The truth spills out. For what else would motivate parents to spend $40,000 to give their 3-year-old a head start? According to these luxe preschools, there is one goal that justifies the cost: get your toddler into a prestigious college 15 years later. The message could hardly be more direct or more threatening. If your kid doesn't ultimately get into a prestigious college, his or her life will be needlessly hard. The pressure doesn't stop with gaining admission to a proper preschool. I'm contacted by a lot of parents who are completely freaking out that their 14-year-old is not spending the summer productively. Irina Smith, a former Stanford University admissions officer, told The Atlantic. Smith now runs a college admissions consultancy in Palo Alto, California, where clients typically spend $10,000 more. The prize itself, an elite college admission, comes at a steep price. The cost of a 4-year college degree from any of the top 20 private colleges in the United States now exceeds $250,000, including room, board, books, and fees. The top 20 public universities cost less, but even they average between $100,000 and $200,000 for a 4-year degree, including room, board, books, and fees, depending on one's state resident status. Society's desire for early blooming validation has led to, let's be honest, price gouging by those official scorekeepers of early achievement, colleges and universities. The rest of us are stuck with big bills and massive debt. Since 1970, college tuition costs have risen 3 times faster than the rate of inflation. College debt in the United States is now $1.3 trillion, with an 11.5% default rate. By all measures, the rush to bloom early has helped create a potential bust bigger than the 2008 housing bubble. Is it worth it? Let's pause and think about this. Let's question the basic premise that early blooming is necessary for lifelong success and fulfillment. Frankly, I don't see the evidence. In fact, I see plenty of evidence going the other way. A recent sports story makes the point. In the 2018 Super Bowl, neither the Philadelphia Eagles nor the New England Patriots had many 5-star recruits in their starting lineups. Translation: only 6 of the 44 starters were top-rated prospects in high school. Now look at the quarterbacks. New England's Tom Brady didn't merit even a humble 2 or 1 ranking in high school. His ranking was NR, no ranking. The victorious Eagles quarterback, Nick Foles, winner of the 2018 Super Bowl's Most Valuable Player award, had a 3 ranking in high school. But for most of the season, Foles was actually the Eagles' backup. He got to play only after starting quarterback Carson Wentz hurt his knee toward the end of the season. Wentz, like Brady, had an NR ranking in high school. No surprise, as a high school junior, Wentz wasn't primarily a quarterback. His school's football program listed him as a wide receiver. With his lowly NR rank from high school, no major college football program had recruited Wentz. He went to North Dakota State, a small college powerhouse. But while he was there, he grew to 6'5" and 230 pounds. Wentz literally blossomed in college, which is late by football standards. Now let's ask ourselves, how many of us are potential Carson Wentzes in our own way? How many of us were tagged with no ranking in high school, or dismissed early in our careers, or are dismissed even now? What gifts and passions might we possess that haven't yet been discovered but that could give us wings to fly? Google once believed in early bloomer supremacy, And it's easy to see why. The company was started by two Stanford graduate students who had scored blazing math SATs. For the first few years, Google hired young computer scientists and math whizzes in the image of its brilliant founders. Then Google discovered its workforce was lopsided. It had too much analytical IQ and not enough artistic sensibility and common sense. This disparity led to costly mistakes in the Google homepage design. More recently, Google has discovered that having high SAT scores and an elite college degree are insufficient predictors of an employee's career success at the company. Early bloomers are the current rage, but late bloomers more than hold their own. Best-selling novelist Janet Ivanovich, born in 1943, grew up in a New Jersey blue-collar family. As a married housewife, she didn't discover her true passion and gift for writing until her 30s. Then for another 10 years she had only false starts and rejections. I sent my weird stories out to editors and agents and collected rejection letters in a big cardboard box. When the box was full, I burned the whole damn thing, crammed myself into pantyhose, and went to work for a temp agency. Ivanovich didn't learn to write thrillers until her 40s. I spent 2 years drinking beer with law enforcement types, learning to shoot, and practicing cussing. At the end of those years I created Stephanie Plum. Billionaire Diane Hendricks, daughter of dairy farmers, sold houses in Wisconsin, married, divorced. Then 10 years later met her next husband, Ken, a roofer. The two maxed out their credit cards to start ABC Supply, a source for windows, gutters, and roofing material. Today Hendricks presides over a company worth $5 billion. She also produces Hollywood movies. Speaking of movies, actor Tom Hanks, the son of a hospital worker and part-time cook, was a slow starter with no obvious prospects who attended his local community college. Record-setting astronaut Scott Kelly, who has spent more than 500 days in space, the most of any American, said he was so bored in high school that I finished in the half of class that made the top half possible. General Motors CEO Mary Barra had a job inspecting fenders and hoods at a GM plant so she could pay for college. Former Xerox CEO Ursula Burns grew up in public housing and worked as an executive assistant early in her career. Jeannie Courtney was 50 when she started a globally respected therapeutic boarding school for troubled teenage girls. She had no formal training in the field but rather a typical hodgepodge background that sounds, well, quite average. She had taught 8th grade, run a video rental store, and sold property. There are no second acts in American lives, wrongly observed the great Gatsby author F. Scott Fitzgerald. But Fitzgerald was an early blooming snob. He attended Princeton and was already a famous literary success in his mid-20s. But that was his peak. By his 30s, Fitzgerald was spiraling downward. He must have met all kinds of late bloomers and second acts who were on their way up. He died a bitter man at 44, the same age that Raymond Chandler began to write detective stories. Chandler was 51 in 1939, the year his first book, The Big Sleep, was published. Are things now different? Early bloomers are in the headlines, but are they succeeding as much as the media lead us to believe? In fact, many early bloomers are suffering terribly. The pressure to achieve early success led to 3 student suicides in the 2014-15 school year at Gunn High School, a public school in Palo Alto, California, 3 miles from the elite Stanford University campus. All were good students striving for early achievement. By March in the same school year, 42 Gunn students had been hospitalized or treated for suicidal thoughts. Theirs is hardly an isolated story. Rates of depression and anxiety among young people in the United States have been increasing for the last 50 years. Today, 5 to 8 times as many high school and college students meet the diagnostic criteria for major depression or anxiety disorder as in the 1960s. The Centers for Disease Control recently found that among high school students in the United States, 16% reported seriously considering suicide, 13% reported creating a plan for suicide, and 8% reported trying to take their own life in the 12 months preceding the survey. These numbers are grim. As with many cultural trends in America, we seem to have exported our anxiety as well. The 2014 survey released by the World Health Organization found depression to be the #1 cause of illness and disability in adolescents worldwide. And if you think getting into the right college eases that anxiety, think again. In the past 15 years, depression has doubled and suicide rates have tripled among American college students. A study by the University of California found that incoming freshmen showed the lowest rates of self-reported emotional health that had been seen in 5 decades of tracking. In fact, nearly all the campus mental health directors surveyed in 2013 by the American College Counseling Association reported that the number of students with severe psychological problems was rising at their schools. Students themselves report high rates of emotional distress, and they too are rising. A 2014 survey by the American College Health Association found that 54% of college students said they had felt overwhelming anxiety in the previous 12 months. These rising rates of mental illness in young adults is nothing short of alarming. Some part of the increase is likely due to better diagnosis, increased access to care, and greater willingness to seek help. But most experts agree that a significant portion of the trend is due to our changing cultural expectations. And these expectations, based on intensified measurement and evaluation, seem to have made even the most successful students more fragile than ever before. Brittleness and fragility should not be the prizes of early academic achievement. Being seen as a potential late bloomer was once a mark of vitality, patience, and pluck. Nowadays, more and more, it is seen as a defect and a consolation prize. This is an awful trend, since it diminishes the very things that make us human: our experiences, our resilience, and our lifelong capacity to grow. Even early bloomers are not exempt from the suspicion that they are somehow flawed if, God forbid, their life takes a complicated turn. Women especially feel society's scorn for not living up to their early blooming potential. Carol Fishman Cohen was an early bloomer. She was the student body president at Pomona College, then a Harvard Business School graduate, and finally a star performer at a Los Angeles investment bank. All before 30. Then life intervened. As it does, Cohen stepped off the fast track to have 4 children and raise them. When she tried to step back into a career of investment banking, she found the doors locked. As weeks of frustration piled up, she began to doubt her own capabilities. I felt a shattering loss of confidence. So much had changed while I was out, from the way financial deals were done to small things like email, text messaging, and PowerPoint presentations. Cohen had a suspicion she wasn't the only person who felt like this. She started a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called iRelaunch. Its focus is the professional who wants to re-enter the workforce after a hiatus and bloom once more. Her company bills itself as the return-to-work experts and consults both to re-entering professionals and to the companies that hire them. Cohen writes frequently for Harvard Business Review on these topics. Once an early bloomer, she is now a stellar example of a second-act late bloomer. The fact is, many of us are late bloomers of some kind. At some point, we got stuck. I did, for many years. At 25, despite a 4-year degree from a good university, I failed to hold a job beyond dishwasher, night watchman, and temporary typist. I was ragingly immature. Not surprisingly, my deep inferiority feelings grew worse as I remained glued to life's launching pad. As I look back, I'm more forgiving of my early 20s self, since my brain's prefrontal cortex, the location of what brain researchers call executive functioning, was not fully developed. My brain, literally, was not ready to bloom. Does that sound like you? Are your kids like that? Given the intense pressure on us to succeed, in school, in sports, in our early careers, we panic. But neuroscience makes it clear that we should go easier on ourselves. The median age for the full maturation of executive functioning is around 25. I was closer to 27 or 28 before I became conscious that I could think rationally, plan ahead, and comport myself like an adult. This was a full decade after I took the SAT and a half decade after I graduated from a good university. I shudder to think what would have happened if those 2 failures had been my ultimate sorting criteria. Record-setting American astronaut Scott Kelly, a late bloomer himself, was even less of a standout. I spent most days looking out the classroom window, he told me. You could have held a gun to my head, and it wouldn't have made a difference. Kelly's brain wasn't ready to bloom. Many of us see more of ourselves in Scott Kelly than in Mark Zuckerberg. We too have stories of fumbling starts, confusion, career or educational gaps, bad habits, bad luck, or lack of confidence. For the fortunate majority of us, however, some kind of intellectual or spiritual awakening happened, and we stepped onto a new, improved road. We found our way. But others become so steeped in shame or see themselves as so far removed from opportunity that they never develop their ability to bloom. And I would argue that failure to bloom during one's lifetime is catastrophic for people and for societies. You would think, therefore, that society would be encouraging of potential late bloomers, especially as we live longer, reach adulthood later, and explore new employment possibilities with greater frequency. People need to know they can bloom and excel and come into their own at any age or stage. So what exactly does it mean to be a late bloomer? Simply put, a late bloomer is a person who fulfills their potential later than expected. They often have talents that aren't visible to others initially. The key word here is expected, and they fulfill their potential frequently in novel and unexpected ways, surprising even those closest to them. They are not attempting to satisfy, with gritted teeth, the expectations of their parents or society. A false path that leads to burnout and brittleness, or even to depression and illness. As Oprah Winfrey says, everyone has a supreme destiny. Late bloomers are those who find their supreme destiny on their own schedule, in their own way. In researching this book, I asked academics, psychologists, and other social scientists how they define and view late bloomers. Is there a rigorous, extensive research base out there to tap for latent clues or familiar guideposts? I wondered. The simple answer is no. Up to now, little formal research has been done on late bloomers. Much of academia seems to have ignored this particular aspect of human development, except in rare cases in which it is connected to a developmental disorder. In other words, late blooming is usually explored through the lens of dysfunction or as an abnormality. Even in academic research, the late bloomer gets little respect. Recently, scholars have begun to explore aspects of the late bloomer concept, debunking the myth of average and studying the intricacies of individual development. L. Todd Rose, the director of the Mind, Brain, and Education program at Harvard University, and Scott Barry Kaufman, scientific director of the Imagination Institute and the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, are spectacular late bloomers themselves who nearly flunked out of high school, as they recount in their books. Still, a specific, all-purpose definition of a late bloomer or any type of helpful taxonomy of late bloomers eludes us. To help fill this gap, I began researching people, both in history and living today, whose paths toward destiny and fulfillment could be called late blooming. In addition, I interviewed hundreds of people who had bloomed late or were on a quest to do so. How did they define the arcs of their success, including false starts along the way? How did they overcome cultural and self-confidence challenges that often afflict late bloomers? As I started my research, my thesis was that a society that excessively focuses on early achievement colors perceptions about individuals' potential for later success in a way that disregards far more people than it rewards. And I assumed that potential late bloomers, that is, the majority of us sorted by society's efficient early bloomer conveyor belt into less than bins, just needed to jump back onto the same conveyor belt with new skills, new habits, and new techniques. I was confident that all they had to do was shake it off and get back in the game. But that's not what I discovered. Most of the late bloomers I interviewed didn't bloom by belatedly copying the habits, skills, and career paths of early bloomers. In fact, trying to do so was almost always a recipe for failure and heartbreak. Think about the starting point of a late bloomer. In all probability, his or her talents and passions were overlooked by a culture and educational system that measures for a cruelly narrow range of skills. It closed off the person's paths of discovery and encouragement and potential. It did not open the doors to a successful future for them because it didn't even see them. So it makes little sense for the late bloomer to climb back aboard the early bloomer conveyor belt with renewed determination, hardened resolve, and more training and college debt. The conveyor belt is going in only one direction. What potential late bloomers have to do is to get off the conveyor belt and find a new path of discovery. My fondest hope is that this book will inspire you, or your children, to do just that. Late Bloomers is structured in the following order. The first 2 chapters examine how we arrived at this moment of early blooming madness, and the shockingly high price we pay for it, both as individuals and as a society. Chapter 3 reveals how the latest neuroscience and cognition research supports the concept of blooming, not just in our teens and young adult years but throughout our lives. That means our current obsession with early blooming is a human construct, not supported by science. I believe you'll be surprised, relieved, and happy as you read Chapter 4 and its explanation of 6 unique and powerful late blooming gifts. The book's second half dives deeper into additional late bloomer advantages that are not obvious. In fact, they may seem like barriers at first, but with insight, practice, and patience, we can harness them toward a lifetime of blooming. Enjoy the journey, and when you're finished, let's keep the discussion going. Chapter 1: Our Early Bloomer Obsession. Pop neuroscience writer Jonah Lehrer was the very definition of an early bloomer. Born and raised in Los Angeles, at 15 the precocious teenager won a $1,000 prize for a NASDAQ-sponsored essay contest. Lehrer attended Columbia University, the Ivy League's New York anchor, where he majored in neuroscience and co-authored a paper that delved into the genetic origins of Down syndrome. But young Lehrer was no mere science whiz. He also bestrode Columbia's political and literary world, first as a writer for the Columbia Review, then for 2 years as the esteemed journal's editor. It surprised no one that Lehrer's next move was to win a Rhodes Scholarship. At Oxford University's Wolfson College, he walked in the steps of Wolfson's founder, the legendary Sir Isaiah Berlin, and studied philosophy. It could be rightly said that young Lehrer was a polymath, that rarest of people who, like Thomas Jefferson, are expert across many different disciplines. Lehrer, like Jefferson, could also write cogently. In 2007, at 26, he published his first book. The well-reviewed Proust Was a Neuroscientist. 2 other books quickly followed: How We Decide in 2009 and Imagine, How Creativity Works in 2012, which made the New York Times bestseller list. If Lehrer was a polymath in his grasp of varying intellectual topics, he was also a paragon of multimedia. Not only could he write in different formats, books, essays, columns, and blogs. He proved to be a gifted radio host on National Public Radio's Radiolab. On television, he was a witty guest on The Colbert Report and other shows. Money soon followed. Lehrer was said to have earned $1 million book advance for Imagine. He began a lucrative side career as a paid speaker. While he was not in the $80,000 per speech fee range of his New Yorker colleague and writer Malcolm Gladwell, he was earning up to $40,000 for an hour's talk. With money pouring in, Lehrer, only 29, bought an architecturally famous home, the Shulman House, in California's Hollywood Hills, for $2.2 million. Lehrer achieved big and early, and he did it with his own radiant intellect. Lehrer's astonishing rise in the intertwined worlds of publishing and journalism parallels the rise of what, with a nod to quiet author Susan Cain, we might call the wonderkind ideal. Translated, wonderkind literally means wonder child. Throughout the early 2010s, Lehrer's flashing rise from talented student to best-selling author to media phenomenon embodied a new cultural hero, the early bloomer, whose emergence reached a tipping point just as we were finding our footing in a new millennium. The archetypical wonderkind, like Lehrer, blooms early, becomes rich and famous, and makes sure we all know it. He or she may be precociously talented or technologically gifted, possessed of an otherworldly attractiveness, or the beneficiary of great family connections. Regardless, wonderkinds not only reach the pinnacle of their chosen field faster than anyone else, they likely become wealthy in the process. The media is a powerful lens through which to observe and track the rise of wonderkinds. Use of the term in various media platforms has skyrocketed in the last several decades. According to Google, the appearance of the word wonderkind in books, articles, newspapers, and other media has increased by more than 1,000% since 1960. And it's no wonder, these have been great times for precocious bloomers. Singers like Taylor Swift, Adele, Rihanna, Selena Gomez, and Justin Bieber. Rappers like The Weeknd and Chance the Rapper. Actors like Jennifer Lawrence, Margot Robbie, Adam Driver, and Donald Glover, and models like Kendall and Kylie Jenner and Jiggy and Bella Hadid are cross-platform celebrities who wield culture-defining influence. And at the time of their rise, they were all in their 20s or younger. Our newest mass media platform, the internet, is dominated by a slew of young web celebs. YouTubers and Instagrammers like Lily Singh, Jake Paul, Mark Fishbach, Zoe Sugg, and Lil Pons have turned their millions, or tens of millions, of followers into media mini-empires that include major corporate sponsorship, merchandising deals, and paid public appearances. All the cited web celebs did this while in their teens and early 20s. In sports, it's to the athlete's advantage to bloom young. Early achievement on the field or in the gym wins a spot on the best teams, garners the best coaching, and makes available the greatest resources. This has always been the case. What's changed is how much earlier these athletes get picked out for being exceptional. At 14, Owen Pappo already had 30 scholarship offers from collegiate football powerhouses like Florida State, Notre Dame, Louisiana State, Ohio State, and Alabama. Other young football stars considering scholarship offers include Caden Martin, 13, Titan Lackadon, 11, and Bunchy Young, 10. But they all seem on the mature side compared to Havon Finney, Jr., who was offered a football scholarship to the University of Nevada as a 9-year-old. It's not just in football, though, that young, hopeful superstars are plucked from the masses. Nearly 30% of all recruits in lacrosse, soccer, and volleyball are offered scholarships while they're still too young to officially commit to a school. But these days it's not just athletes who seem to get younger every year. P.J. Fleck of the Minnesota Gophers became the youngest head football coach in Big Ten history at 36. Lincoln Riley became head football coach of the Oklahoma Sooners, a perennial top 20 team, at 33. With an annual paycheck of $3.1 million. And at 30, Sean McVay of the Los Angeles Rams became the youngest head coach in modern NFL history. What about general managers, those cigar-chomping, backroom dealmakers who control rosters and hire coaches? As I write, no fewer than 10 Major League Baseball general managers are under 40. With David Stearns, of the Milwaukee Brewers, the youngest at 31. Stearns is downright old, though, compared to 26-year-old John Chayka, the general manager of the National Hockey League's Phoenix Coyotes. Chayka is the youngest general manager in major professional sports history. It's well known that technology is a young person's game, but it's surprising to see just how young. In 2016, PayScale, an online compensation information company based in Seattle, surveyed the median age of workers at 32 of the most successful companies in the technology industry. Just 6 of the companies had a median employee age greater than 35 years old. 8 had a median age of 30 or younger. While these results may affirm a widely held hunch, they're nonetheless striking. Just to put it in context, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, The overall median age of American workers is 42.3 years. Some of the companies with the youngest workers in the pay scale survey included Facebook, with a median age of 28, and Google, with a median age of 29. What about the owners, executives, and CEOs? Currently, Forbes lists 10 billionaires in business under 30, including Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snap, and Bobby Murphy, Snap co-founder. The two started Snap when they were both 22. And what about politics, our country's control center? National political operatives under 35 include Lorella Presley, Jenna Lowenstein, Simone Sanders, and Ben Wessel. In the White House, Stephen Miller became the president's senior advisor for policy at 31, and Hope Hicks became White House communications director at 28. Hicks subsequently resigned. Media have latched onto this rise of the wonderkind ideal. My own magazine, Forbes, has turned its 30 under 30 issue into an entire industry, with separate lists broken down by country and multiple conferences worldwide. At this point, nearly every major magazine has a yearly issue based on a list of early achievers. There are 40 under 40 and 30 under 30 lists in business, fashion, advertising, entertainment, professional cooking, poetry, and even meatpacking. But forget these 30 under 30 lists. When it comes to achievement, 30 is becoming the new 50. In 2014, Time started an annual list of most influential teens. That's right, teens. This fetish for youth and early blooming has reached such a fever pitch that fashion commentator Simon Doonan pronounced, "Youth is the new global currency." Let's pause. We're not wrong to recognize and congratulate early bloomers. Their achievements deserve acknowledgement. But our culture's obsession with early achievement has become detrimental to the majority of the population, to the multitudes of us who develop in different ways and at different paces. It pushes the message that if you haven't become famous, reinvented an industry, or banked 7 figures while you're still young enough to get carded, you've somehow made a wrong turn in life. This message, I believe, is far more dangerous than most people realize. Around the middle of the 20th century, meritocracy began to trump aristocracy. That trend accelerated throughout the second half of the 20th century. Today it's widely accepted that meritocracy and aristocracy have become one and the same. The lords of the universe are not sitting on trust funds. Rather, they possess wealth of a more modern kind. Like Jonah Lehrer, most of the new lords achieve perfect or near perfect scores on their SATs at age 16 or 17, setting them up for admission to a top-ranked university. In response to the new meritocracy, we have become obsessed with test scores and college rankings. Teenagers take college preparatory tests, either the SAT or the ACT or both, at a higher rate now than ever before. More than 1.6 million students took the SAT in 2017, and for the first time, the number of students who took the ACT surpassed the SAT takers by about 2,000. Many students take both tests, take them multiple times during their junior and senior years, and also take the PSAT, the SAT 2 subject tests, and advanced placement tests. In fact, over 6.7 million test takers completed the SAT or PSAT-related assessment during the 2016-17 school year. With all the concern over higher education costs and the growing burden of student debt, it's easy to overlook the significant cost of preparing to apply to college. The expenses start adding up well before students ever apply for college, in the form of commercial test preparation classes and tutoring for the SAT and the ACT. The tests are an industry unto themselves, with hundreds of millions of dollars spent on test fees, administration, and preparation. The test prep industry generates nearly $1 billion every year and provides income for more than 115,000 people. Raising the stakes even higher, some of the most select in-person or one-on-one online tutoring packages, aimed at rich parents, can cost many thousands of dollars. The high cost is in part because of the demand for individual tutoring. The rich can and do pay big bucks. Parents in Silicon Valley casually talk of spending $50,000 on tutors over their child's 4 years of high school. Group classes, offered by companies like Princeton Review and Kaplan Test Prep, are still popular and relatively affordable. 30 hours of group preparation with Princeton Review, for example, costs $1,000 to $1,600 depending on the size of the class. Individual tutoring, however, is all the rage, and it usually comes at a steep price. One New York-based tutor, Anthony James Green, recently gained attention with his $1,000 an hour fee. The prices clearly indicate that students and families are engaged in a college admissions arms race. In the words of Robert A. Schieffer, Public Education Director of Fair Test, an equity and testing advocacy group. But for most people, paying to get an edge on standardized test scores is not only worth it, it's necessary. As long as high-stakes tests remain an important aspect of competitive college admissions, there'll be no shortage of people looking for an advantage. we see the same pressure cooker for early measurable achievement outside academics. Consider sports. According to a recent Washington Post story, 70% of kids quit sports by age 13. Why? The kids have a ready explanation. It's not fun anymore. But why exactly would that be so? Sports have become highly specialized and brutally competitive at earlier and earlier ages, for two distinct reasons. One reason is an acceleration of the traditional one. Some kids just want to be as good as they can in sports. They want to run in the district track meet, start on the high school basketball team, or win a football letter jacket. The talented and ambitious ones keep going, to see if they can compete at the highest college levels, on full scholarships. Then perhaps play in the pros or make the Olympic team. Kids in every era have aspired to be on the Wheaties box. But increased affluence has accelerated this trend, providing young athletes with opportunities to go to summer sports camps at age 8, buy the best equipment at 10, and get excellent coaching and perhaps even a personal trainer at 14. In short, the table stakes, time and money, for achieving sports excellence are far higher today. The second reason driving early sports achievement is subtler and more corrosive. As the Post reported, our culture no longer supports older kids playing for the fun of it. The pressure to raise successful kids means that we expect them to be the best. If they are not, they're encouraged to cut their losses and focus on areas where they can excel. We see it in middle school orchestra, where a kid who doesn't make first chair wonders if it's worth continuing to play, playing for the simple love of the sport or the music. How 20th century sports for many students is simply a way to prove their merit early. Again, the culprit appears to be the race to get into the right college and on the right track for early success. This idea of sports as a resume enhancer is validated by Judy Robinovitz, a certified educational planner at SCORE at the top learning center in schools. Robinovitz earns her living by getting kids into the best colleges possible and has published a guide called The 10 Most Important Factors in College Admissions. She advises her clients to focus on continually improving grades in a challenging curriculum and on gaining solid SAT scores. No surprise there. She also emphasizes extracurricular activities, advising her clients how to frame their participation in them to maximum advantage in the college admissions process. Pay attention to the language in her suggestions 4 and 6. 4. Passionate involvement in a few activities, demonstrating leadership, initiative, impact, depth, not breadth, of experience is most important. Colleges seek angled students with a passion, not well-rounded students. 6. Special talents or experiences that will contribute to an interesting, well-rounded student body. A student who goes the extra mile to develop a special talent in sports, research, writing, the arts, or anything else will gain an edge. Again, the sword of college admissions hangs over kids today. Did you note the absence of the words passion and fun? Fun is beside the point. A kid must excel in a sport. Loving the activity is beside the point. College admissions demand that the student demonstrates excellence. He or she has to find the right activity in which to excel, then drop the others into the frivolity waste bin in order to gain an edge and stand out. And why not? It's now harder than ever to gain admittance to college, even to many of the schools that used to be considered fail-safe backups. The following table shows just how much harder it's become since 2001 to be accepted by 10 of the most prestigious universities in the United States. In 2001, the University of Chicago accepted 44% of applicants. By 2015, it offered incoming spots to just 8%. Similarly, Johns Hopkins accepted 34% in 2001, but by 2015, that number had dropped to 14%. Some 22% of applicants were admitted to the University of Pennsylvania in 2001. But in 2015, that number was less than half. In fact, the acceptance rates in 8 out of the 10 schools on the list have been cut by half or 2/3 in just 15 years. That's an extraordinary increase in competition and exclusivity in a single generation. For historical context, consider that Stanford University's acceptance rate in 1950 was nearly 85%. In 1990, it was 22%. Today, it's just 4.6%, the lowest in the nation. But it's not just the elite schools that have become significantly harder to get into. In the last decade, the acceptance rates for a broad group of universities and colleges has plummeted. At Northeastern University, the acceptance rate has dropped from 62% to 32%. At the University of Tulsa, from 76% to 40%. At Tulane, from 55% to 26%. At Colorado College, from 58% to 22%. And at Vanderbilt, from 46% to 13%. What about those backup schools? Even former party schools like San Diego State and Cal State Long Beach now admit only 1/3 of all applicants. Spanning all accredited universities and colleges, The nationwide acceptance rate dropped by 10% in the last 10 years. The simple fact is, there are very few automatics anymore in the world of higher education. This intense pressure has spawned entire industries based on squeezing the best performance out of kids and young adults, no matter the cost. A quick search on Amazon turns up a seemingly endless list of books with titles like Grit for Kids, The Grit Guide for Teens, How Children Succeed, Positive Pushing, How I Turned My Daughter into a Prodigy, Top of the Class, and Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Even the For Dummies series is in on the act with raising smart kids for dummies. And make no mistake, intelligence-boosting products are big business. Toys, DVDs, software, games, and educational programs are designed and marketed to make a child into an intellectual prodigy. Baby Einstein, a $400 million a year company formerly owned by Disney, makes multimedia toys intended to enhance the cognitive abilities of infants and toddlers. Guaranteed to enrich baby's young mind, these toys are available at Walmart, Target, and Amazon. This is but one of many companies and products that make up a child enhancement industry that sells Smarty Pants vitamins, STEM toys, and other tech toys. All products that promise to give your child a leg up on the competition. We certainly can't have toddlers deficient in STEM skills. Every summer break, according to an American Express survey, parents spend $16 billion on software coding camps, tech academies, music and dance lessons, additional academic coursework, and private tutoring. Youth athletics has become a $15 billion a year industry, where parents can now hire $100 per hour strength and conditioning coaches, private hitting or passing coaches, and all-star traveling teams. According to Time, local leagues have been nudged aside by private club teams, a loosely governed constellation that includes everything from development academies affiliated with professional sports franchises to regional squads run by moonlighting coaches with little experience. The most competitive teams vie for talent and travel to national tournaments. Some families spend up to 10% of their income on registration fees, travel, camps, and equipment to keep their kids practicing for success on the field or in the gym. But today it's not enough that kids practice. They have to practice the right way, in a way that conforms to research psychologist Anders Ericsson's concept of deliberate practice. As described by Ericsson, famous for his 10,000-hour concept discussed in Malcolm Gladwell's 2008 bestselling Outliers. Deliberate practice involves the systematic pursuit of personal improvement by focusing on well-defined, specific goals and areas of expertise. Parents who want their child to practice deliberately must hire a teacher or coach who has a demonstrated ability to help others improve the desired area, say chess, ballet, or music, and who can also give continuous feedback. It also requires your child to constantly practice outside his or her comfort zone. Writing about her 11-year-old son, author and entrepreneur Penelope Trunk perfectly described the rigor and madness of deliberate practice. Her son, auditioning as a cellist for Juilliard's pre-college program, spent 3 hours every day for 6 months learning to play one 4-minute song. He learned to practice by changing the rhythm of the piece. He learned to play one note at a time with a tuner. He learned to play each measure with a different metronome timing. And then he played the piece so slowly it took 20 minutes instead of just 4. At one point, her son and his private cello teacher spent 1 hour practicing 5 notes. And yes, he made the cut at Juilliard. With concentration, it seems, any child can be taught to be a prima ballerina or chess champion, a mathematics prodigy or a Michelin star chef, according to the prevailing theories on grit, focus, and practice. Any child with enough deliberate practice, and parents with a lot of money, can become a concert-level cellist or an Olympic equestrian. The experience of trying to reach that level can help them get into college and later land the perfect job. So what could possibly be the downside to these trends? For too many children, this intense pressure for early achievement is damaging to their physical and mental health. Millions of American children are on prescribed drugs for attention deficit disorder, primarily because their ad hurts their ability to sit still and pay attention in school, thus hurting their grades, their standardized test scores, and ultimately their college prospects. Dr. Leonard Sachs, a medical doctor and psychologist who wrote about troubled teenagers and boys adrift and girls on the edge, told me, a kid in the United States is now 14 times more likely to be on medication for AD compared to a kid in the UK. A kid in the United States is 40 times more likely to be diagnosed and treated for bipolar disorder compared to a kid in Germany. A kid in the United States is 93 times more likely to be on medications like Risperdal and Zyprexa used to control behavior compared to a kid in Italy. So in this country, and really in no other country, we now use medication as a first resort for any kid who's not getting straight A's or not sitting still in class. No other country does this. This is a uniquely American phenomenon, and it's quite new. One might say that 21st century society has turned a college rejection into a clinical disease. Now, more than ever, it views a college degree as a prerequisite for a good life. But since the number of openings at colleges has barely increased, parents are essentially trying to push an ever-growing number of kids through an ever-narrowing funnel. Let's stop and ask, is the sacrificial expenditure of money, wrecked family dinners, and kids exhausted from organized activities producing better, more productive, or happier people? Is it helping people bloom? For the majority of kids, it's doing the exact opposite. This pressure for early achievement has an unwitting dark side. It demoralizes young people by forcing adolescents to practice like professionals, to strive for perfection, and to make life choices in their teens. We're actually harming them. We're stunting their development, closing their pathways to discovery, and making them more fragile, just when we should be encouraging kids to dream big, take risks, and learn from life's inevitable failures. We're teaching them to live in terror of making the slightest mistake. Forging kids into wonderkinds is making them brittle. Journalist Megan McArdle has written extensively about the fear of failure that plagues today's young adults. In 2014, she recounted the following exchange with an ambitious high schooler. The other day, after one of my talks, a 10th grade girl came up and shyly asked if I had a minute. I always have a minute to talk to shy high school sophomores, having been one myself. And this is what she asked me. I understand what you're saying about trying new things and hard things, but I'm in an international baccalaureate program and only about 5% of us will get 4.0. So how can I try a subject where I might not get an A? To paraphrase McArdle's response, if you can't try something new in 10th grade, when can you? This topic is of particular importance to Stanford psychology professor Carol Dweck, author of the best-selling 2006 book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. On a late summer day, I sat down with Dweck to discuss the changes she's seen in her years of teaching college freshmen. I think society is in a crisis, she told me. Kids seem more exhausted and brittle today. I'm getting much more fear of failure, fear of evaluation, than I've gotten before. I see it in a lot of kids, a desire to play it safe. They don't want to get into a place of being judged, of having to produce. And these are the kids who were admitted to Stanford. These are the early winners in life. The optimism of youth, it seems, has been warped into a crippling fear of failure.